This podcast is intended to provide information for educational purposes only and to serve as a starting point for you to have a conversation with your personal physician. Nothing stated on this podcast should be considered medical advice. Consult with your physician before undertaking or changing any treatment plan.
So the question that all of us have had is, are people going to be on semaglutide, be doing well with their weight loss, and all of a sudden the effects start wearing off and the weight starts coming back? Turns out this study says, no, they're not.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Pound of Cure Weight Loss Podcast, Wegovy for the long run, episode 29.
Absolutely.
And you're taking off on Saturday. Where are you going?
I'm going to Guatemala.
Tell us more about that.
So this is my third time going. It's one of my best friends from my residency has been going down for like 10 or 12 years. And he asked me a couple of years ago to go and do the general surgery down there. So I do 90% of our practice is bariatric surgery, but I do complicated hernias, and I've done so many gallbladders and inguinal hernias and everything over the years that I still know how to do those surgeries.
And you've been on call for general surgery.
And I still take a little while, not so much anymore, but not too long ago I took some general surgery calls. So I do a lot of the general surgery, and it's kind of like, to some degree, a lot of it's like riding a bike, and the same skills you use in bariatrics you use in general surgery too. So I go to Guatemala and I do hernias. And I've gone a couple of years, so I'm getting I get some more difficult cases as they kind of get to know you. And actually what's really exciting to me is that I'm bringing my daughter.
Yeah.
And she just graduated from high school, and she's kind of at that age where she's like, come on, world, I'm ready to take you on. And she's just interested in new experiences, and she has zero interest in healthcare. And, but she's interested in kind of going down and seeing a part of the world that she's never seen, and spending time with people that she wouldn't normally interact with, and also just serving other people. I think
that's so great.
Whether you go into healthcare or not, just being good and helping others is something that I think a lot of us get benefit from. So, so the two of us are going down to Guatemala, and along with one of my best friends, and we're having. Yeah,
it's gonna be a great time.
It's gonna be a great time, and I like operating, so. It's not work to me.
It's a great time for me too. Well, I can't wait to hear all about that.
Yeah, so I'll maybe we'll post some pictures and let you know how we do when we get back. So let's move into our in the news segment, and this is where the title of our show comes from. And this article comes from US News, and it's called "More Studies Support Wegovy's Long-Term Weight Loss Benefits." This is a really important study that just came out. So there were two trials that they did with Wegovy. The first is the STEP trial. And the STEP trial was what they used for the weight loss. And that's what showed that the higher dose semaglutide or Wegovy shows about 15 to 16% total body weight loss. And that's what their stage 3 trials were for FDA approval. They also have been running for about 4 years something called a SELECT trial. The SELECT trial measured not necessarily weight loss as the outcome, but cardiovascular disease. And this is where we came up with this statement about 20% risk reduction. And this is how they got Medicare to approve Wegovy for cardiovascular risk reduction. So what they did was they looked at the SELECT trial, and they, because the trial I think has been going on a little longer than the STEP trial, and they kept everybody on semaglutide for the 4 years, they said, hey, how is the weight loss 4 years down the road? And this is a question that all of us are dying to know, because we see with weight loss surgery, particularly the sleeve, we see weight regain, and certainly we see it within 4 years quite commonly. A lot less weight regain with a gastric bypass. So the question that all of us have had is, are people going to be on semaglutide, be doing well with their weight loss, and all of a sudden the effects start wearing off and the weight starts coming back? Turns out this study says, no, they're not. Wow. That we're seeing excellent maintenance of weight loss at 4 years out. So after 4 years, they saw 11.7% total body weight loss. Now in the STEP trial, I think it was 68 weeks or something. It was a little over a year. They saw somewhere in the range of 15 to 16% total body weight loss. But when we look at the SELECT trial, because it's a different set of patients, and there's a really important component that I think you're going to have a lot to say on, they didn't see as much weight loss in this trial as they did in the STEP trial. And again, I think the patients were a little bit younger in the STEP trial, and these patients all had cardiovascular risk, so there's probably not nearly the same degree of exercise. But the big difference in the STEP trial and the SELECT trial And what I think accounts for the difference between 11 or 12% total body weight loss we saw in the SELECT trial and 15 or 16% that we see in the STEP trial is that they did not receive nutritional counseling in the SELECT trial. And so that nutritional counseling counted for probably about a quarter of 25% more weight loss, about 3 or 4% total, but about 25% of their total weight loss we saw. And we've seen this over and over again. And so there's two really important take-home points. And the first is that this medication works over the long run. And so that's, I think, incredibly reassuring. Of course, the patients all took it. It wasn't they took it and then didn't take it for 3 years and maintained the weight loss. They took the medication for all 4 years, but the effects didn't wear off. And the second is that nutrition matters with this medication.
And that's why we have made our nutrition program such an integral part of the practice, because we are here to get our patients the best results.
Right.
We use science and backed by data to show the benefit of it. It's not just because we want to be mean, it's we want to give them the best results. And this is a huge 25% of total success with this is that nutrition piece.
Right. And I think especially as people have to weather the shortages, right? If you're going to weather these shortages or potentially lose access altogether, and we see, I think 1 in 8 people have tried a GLP-1 medication at this point in our country, but we do not have 1 in 8 people actively taking these medications. So the overwhelming majority of people who start these medications actually don't finish them. And so the nutrition is going to be so critical to prevent that inevitable weight gain. And I think this study really shows that there is a difference, that nutrition does matter. We see this all the time. We see it not only in the weight loss, but also in the side effects. If you don't follow the nutritional guidelines, it's a lot less comfortable. You're going to be in a world of hurt. Yeah, it's a lot less comfortable to be on the meds. Yeah. But I think the great news is though that these medications don't wear off over time, at least at 4 years. Again, 10 years, we might see something different at 10 years, but at 4 years, that's really, really great. That's a great finding. And I haven't seen this as much in the news as I would have expected it to be, because this has been a major criticism. We talk about tachyphylaxis and we see this a lot with phentermine, which is up until these meds was probably the most effective weight loss medication, where people are on it and it just starts wearing off over time.
Right.
But we're not seeing it here. And the truth is, I haven't seen it so much in my practice either. I've not seen patients gaining weight back while continuing to take the med.
Well, now we're starting to get those years of just data with the patients to see,
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, now we have our double black diamond special story today. Dr. Warner, you want to share a little bit more about what Armetta has to share?
Yeah. So Armetta is a patient of mine from 10 years ago, and certainly one of my most memorable patients. And she has a pretty harrowing story to tell us. So let's hear from Armetta. She's remote from us. She's coming to us remotely from Michigan.
I want to introduce one of my most memorable patients of all time. So of course, I remember all my patients and I love all my patients, but there are some people who I really have been through a lot with. And I think Armetta is absolutely one of the people who comes to mind when I look back on my 15 years of bariatric surgery and think about some very challenging and difficult cases. So Armetta, why don't you set us up? Why don't you talk about the first time we met, maybe even a little bit before then, when, what brought you in to see me in the first place?
Well, looking back then, I moved to Detroit, Michigan back in 2012 to take a job at WJR. And I'm really excited about it, but, I had some health issues before I came. Before I moved to Michigan, I tried several times to look into bariatric surgery, but I never had the right insurance, or something didn't work, so I couldn't get it done there. So fast forward, I decided to still move on to take the job here in Detroit. And I said, well, once I get settled and kind of check out what's going on, maybe I can find somebody to help me. My primary physician at the time Dr. I think her name was Paulina Singh, suggested that I see a Dr. Matthew Weiner. And she says he's been really great about helping people. Maybe he can help you. I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. I was just crazy. I just didn't know what to do. And there were still insurance issues even after meeting you. And I got the bright idea to say, well, you know something, maybe I could go to Mexico. It's a little cheaper, get this thing done and just get it over with. And that is a conversation I had with you. And I think at this point, what was your reaction?
Well, first of all, how much did you weigh when we met? You know, it was quite a bit, I remember.
I think I topped out at 412 pounds.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the first thing, is that you had very severe obesity. You weren't a few pounds overweight, and you also had a lap band, right? So you'd already had one procedure, and a lap band would have made this a revision procedure. And I have this kind of, test I do in the office where if I want to assess a patient's readiness for surgery, I'll have them get up on the exam table unassisted. There's a step up, then you got to climb up and sit around, swing your legs around. It requires, truthfully, it requires a little bit of physical strength. And if you're really severely disabled from your obesity, that's tough. And, when I had you do that, it was like you were climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, like Lindsay did a couple episodes back. I mean, it took every ounce of strength and ability you had to kind of get up and get yourself situated on that exam table. You also had significant pulmonary hypertension, which for me is one of the most concerning things I can see in a patient.
Yeah, it was awful.
The risk was, yeah. You could barely breathe, right?
I could, to tell you how bad it was, and I didn't want anybody to know what was going on, WJR is in the Fisher building, and we had a parking area where we parked, but we had a long walk to the building to get to the 8th floor. I would have to plan on getting there at least a half an hour earlier just to be able to walk through the hallway, stop and rest, praying nobody saw me because it was embarrassing until I could get to the studio. So yeah, it was a challenge.
Yeah. And so I think, putting everything together from my perspective, we had a lot of obstacles going into that surgery. Number one, your BMI. You was 412 pounds. Your BMI was way up there. Number two is your pulmonary function. Your lung function was heavily compromised. It was a combination of this pulmonary hypertension and also just what we call obesity hypoventilation syndrome, which is as your weight gets up there, you just can't breathe anymore. And one of the most amazing things that I see from patients is they go from barely being able to, taking 30 minutes to walk up to their office, to being able to walk without stopping. And that just makes a huge transition in their life. You also had a lap band. So this was a revision surgery. So this was not going to be anything easy.
Oh yeah, that's right. That was an earlier Mexico situation.
But the final and the real issue that kind of brought all of this on was you didn't have coverage for bariatric surgery on your insurance policy.
Exactly.
And
it was excluded.
That was really, it was an exclusion. And that was kind of, that was, of all of those things, we could have worked through the first three, but the exclusion was really what ended up causing all of the problems that you had. So you'd gone to Mexico in the past, you had a lap band, you came to see me. I said, we need to convert your lap band to a gastric bypass, but we have to do all of these things. And also it's not covered. It's very expensive. And so you elected to go to Mexico, correct?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I think sometimes, you think desperate times call for desperate measures, and sometimes you're acting out of emotion because you don't feel there's any other answer. And at that point, it was, I made the decision. I didn't tell a lot of people that I was going. I think you knew and maybe a couple other people. And I said, well, Dr. Weiner, I'm heading out. This was in August. I'll call you when I get back. Well, as I got down there, it was a flight down to San Diego. And what they do is they come to the border to pick you up, to take you over the border for the operation. My breathing was so bad. I thought about that today. My breathing was so bad when I got off the plane in San Diego. I guess like the bariatric or something, the temperature is different, the air quality or something was different. I got off the plane and couldn't breathe. I couldn't even make it through the airport. That's how bad it was. So we finally, got me over the border and we got situated. and they prep you for what they're going to do. But it's really scary because these are people that aren't really connected to anything that's really has gone on with you health wise. And it's only so much that you're going to tell them because you want this operation. And, they prepped me. The next thing I knew, I went in for the surgery, woke up in the wrong bed. That should have been a red flag right there. But I kept telling them I didn't feel well. I didn't feel well. And they said, well, no, you went through everything fine. I said, something's wrong with my stomach. And I guess, what is that when you take the image of people when they're drinking something, you can actually watch it go down?
Sure.
And they said, well, oh, no, look.
Upper GI swallow, yeah.
Right. So I did that, but I am almost convinced, and maybe I could be wrong, I am almost convinced the film that I was looking at was film that I think that they used for everybody, because as many holes as I felt that I had in my stomach of what was going on, they should have seen something, and they didn't. And at that point, if they decide that they don't want to have this conversation, they don't speak English anymore. And that night, I'm there with nobody to talk to, sick.
Oh my God.
I finally called a friend and said, I'm in Mexico. If you don't help me, I'm not going to make it out of here.
Yeah. Wow. So, I think a lot of people listening might be like, how could she do that? Why would she go to Mexico? That's so crazy. That's so dangerous. Some nasty people would probably even say she deserved what happened to her. But I don't think they really understand how miserable it is to be over 400 pounds and to not be able to walk. How old were you at that time?
You don't have a quality of life, period. Let me see. That was about, God. Oh, yeah. Happy 10-year anniversary. It's about 10 years. It's been about 10 years. Yeah. So I'm 64 now. I was 54.
Yeah. I mean, 54, I'm not that far from that age. You should have a lot of life ahead of you, And so when you're in that kind of physical state, you'll do anything if you think it's going to make it better. And the truth is, without the financial resources to afford a self-pay surgery in the U.S. and without bariatric coverage, going to Mexico truthfully was your only realistic option. It really was the only thing. Talk to us a little bit about your nutrition at that time prior to surgery.
And that's a very good point to bring up too. A lot of people probably would think that, wow, she must eat a lot. My goodness, to be 412 pounds, you have to eat a lot. No, that's not true at all. I wish I could show you the picture I found earlier myself when I was 16. The typical average looking kid. I wasn't an emotional eater or anything like that, but I ate like the typical average American kid, hot dogs, pizza, whatever. When you're 15, 20 years old and you take those habits into 25, 30, and 40 and you don't change them, you're bound to run into some problems because you can't eat the way you did when you were young going into, getting older. Some things have to change, and it didn't. I didn't. And it eventually caught up with me. Then you're older, you're sedentary, your lifestyle changes, you're working, and this is a lot of factors.
Yeah. Zoe, talk to us about that. I mean, how often do you see people who are 400 pounds and you really feel like they're not eating that badly?
Yeah, well, and the other piece of it too is what we talk about a lot with dieting history, right? Like going on and off and on and off all of these other diets throughout the years. Armetta, is that something that you feel as though you cycled through or tried to work towards in your adult years of on and off different diets to try to lose the weight? And it just kind of kept creeping that metabolic thermostat that we talk about, chronic dieting and this yo-yoing of weight can also be a really big predictor of difficulty to lose weight for the long term as well.
I would say that's probably, you're absolutely right. You're the expert in that area. I would say there were efforts to change some of the, some of my eating habits. But it wasn't like I was a chronic dieter or anything like that. But it was just the fact that, wow, you just woke up one day. It's just like, how did this happen? and it brought on other problems. I ended up with cervical cancer, endometrial cancer. And one doctor actually said, I think you got it because you were overweight because of the estrogen levels. So that was an operation. I had a total hysterectomy before I moved to Michigan to, go ahead and continue to pursue a better, healthy lifestyle.
Yeah.
So it did cause a lot of problems.
Let's go back to Mexico and let's talk about what's happening. You feel like you're not going to make it. You're in trouble. What happens next? Well, tell us what you can remember of it, at least.
What I can remember is I told my friend.
I kind of got,
Yeah, a friend of mine, again, like I said, I called a friend because I was I was like, I don't know what to do. You got to get me out of here. So she called, I'm not exactly who she got in touch with, but she ended up talking to Sharp Memorial Hospital. That's very close to the border between Mexico and California. And I'm glad it worked out that way. I work out at LA Fitness, and I worked out with an emergency room nurse. She says, Armetta, I don't like that you're going, but do me a favor. Make sure that you're near a hospital that's near the border if they have to get you back to the United States. And I remember Dr. Weiner, you even say, what did you say? You said, Armetta, that's exactly what's going to happen. Something's going to go wrong. All they're going to do is patch you up and just like push you over the border into a hospital. And that's exactly what happened.
You and I spoke before, and I urged you not to go to Mexico.
Right, and if I can use the term that you used at the time, you said, Armetta, you're too sick to go to Mexico. And I looked at it, was like, I understand. It was like, no, I don't think you understand. And your famous double jack diamond or something.
Yes, that's Zoe. I'll refer when Zoe and I are talking about cases, and I'll say, that one's a double black diamond, kind of referring to skiing, which is like, that's the one that's straight down with the moguls and the ice off the cliff. And that really was the nature of your surgery. Because, when I look at patients, you had kind of all of it. You had the medical issues, you had the size, and then it was a revision surgery on top of it. So when you look at complexity of surgery, it doesn't add, it multiplies. And so you have all three components that make surgery challenging. And that made you very much a double black diamond. I mean, getting you through surgery safely at 400 pounds with a history of a lap band and severe pulmonary problems, that really required a tremendous amount of planning and just, generally good luck and a strong team to get you through that safely. And you weren't going to get that in Mexico. You were without question a double black diamond. Yeah.
Very big.
I mean, I don't want to say, not every bariatric center in Mexico does a terrible job. And there are actually some places that do decent work. And I think for some patients in that situation, not the double black diamonds, but, the simple, straightforward cases without any bariatric coverage, who are maybe going down for a sleeve and then planning to use up, like, say, our nutrition program for the post-op support, that may be your best option if you've got a bariatric exclusion. But for you, that I don't think any center in Mexico was appropriate, let alone the one you went to.
Absolutely. I mean, I totally agree. And I think the recovery was very, very long. In fact, what ended up happening 2 weeks into arriving at Sharp Memorial, I was put in a medically induced coma because it was just going from bad to worse, I guess. I remember looking up at the doctor saying, how am I doing? And he wouldn't say anything. And I just kept getting transferred from room to room to room in ICU. And it was quite some time before I actually woke up and could figure out what was going on. So I remember one of the first questions they asked, do you know where you are? And I cried because I didn't even know where I was.
Yeah. So the way I piece this all together is when you have a lap band, you wrap the stomach around the band. That's how you keep it in place. And then when you convert to another procedure, and you went to have a conversion of your lap band to a sleeve, which is another conversation to have, because in general, we don't see great results with that surgery. But you have to really flatten out the stomach completely. And that's the key. You get the stomach perfectly flat, remove the band, and then you do the sleeve. And I think my guess is what happened is you started to have issues with your lungs, and that he didn't take the time necessary, and he just stapled. And where the stomach was folded over, he stapled through 2 layers of stomach. and then it probably just pulled apart because the stapler is really not designed to go through 2 layers of stomach. And you developed a sepsis and a leak, and they ended up doing drainage procedures. They ever operated on you in San Diego. But what happened is the infection ultimately kind of decompressed into your large intestine. And so you had a direct connection between your stomach and your large intestine, which is a complication I've seen exactly once in my life after bariatric surgery, and that was on you. And it is it is a rare and very unfortunate surgery that is also very largely preventable with proper surgical technique. And so you ended up spending 5 or 6 months there, and ultimately they called me. Yeah, they called me up, one of the doctors there, and said, hey, listen, we got to transfer her back, but she still needs some help. Will you take care of her? And I said, absolutely. So we transferred you back, and you came into my office, and I took one look at you, and I said, go to the ER. We got to admit you to the hospital. You were not in any shape to kind of be out there. And so we admitted you to the hospital, did all the tests, and then I did probably a 5-hour surgery to get things, the first of many surgeries, truthfully, to get you straightened out. And you had all of it. You had the colostomy, you had a hernia after it was all said and done. At that time, it was the first time I'd ever done the surgery. I've done it since, actually, in similar situations. I call it the Armetta procedure.
Well, I'm honored.
Where you have kind of a combination of a sleeve and a gastric bypass, where I connected the intestine to, so you had a hole, and I connected the intestine to that hole. And you ended up getting through all this.
And I was just going to say, you've clearly come so far in these 10 years, and I'm sure your life is completely different. Will you share with us a little bit more about what that quality of life is like for you now in comparison, and what are some of the things you're enjoying to do these days?
Life is a lot better. Life is a lot better. Able to, enjoy things with friends, go after 30 years riding a bike. For the first time about a month ago or so, I can't do a lot of running still because of the legs of what happened, with my back, but able to, I still play racquetball a little bit. I can still do that. So I'm kind of back to my tomboy years, tomgirl years or whatever, just out playing, just doing a lot of stuff. So, yeah.
So what have you learned from this whole situation? I mean, from an emotional perspective, from a spiritual perspective, I mean, this is as close to a near-death experience as you can get. And you also ended up on the other side in you ended up kind of getting what you wanted out of the whole thing, right? You wanted all of these things you've achieved. You wanted to eat better, to have a better quality of life. And so, you went through this thing. Man, you came so close to dying. You should have died probably 4 or 5 times in that whole story. Well, and yet here you are on the other side. What's that like spiritually, emotionally,
Oh, well, I'm so glad that you asked about the spiritual aspect. It changed my whole life entirely. Spiritually, not the same person. Came out of that coma totally, totally different. Gosh, people ask me, well, what was it like? I tell people I didn't see the white light. I didn't see Jesus. So I didn't see any of those things like that. But it was it was like being between life and death. You were just in a place, not a bad place. So when it's time to go, not scared, ready. But yeah, it's different. I remember the social worker in California coming in several times. She said she was in tears because they were putting together end of life, I guess, materials to say goodbye. But I pulled through. But it changes your life. You respect life a lot more. I think the things that are important to me are the people that you love and the people that you spend time with. Because at the end of the day, that's all that matters. So I think I love a lot harder. I live a lot harder, and I try to give more.
That's wonderful.
Absolutely.
Great words of wisdom.
So,
any other thoughts, Zoe or Armetta, on this kind of crazy experience and everything you've been through, and any recommendations you'd give to somebody who's maybe considering bariatric surgery, who may be a higher risk patient, because you higher risk, but also higher rewards for you. I mean, would you do this all again?
Honestly,
what would, yeah.
Well, no, the earlier joke today was I'd rather have 10 Mexican surgeries than have to learn a new piece of software. Period. Period. But no, I would tell somebody, again, this is such an emotional time for people. Talk to your doctor. Get a good team of people that you can talk to and see if there's something you can do. Because at the end of the day, one bill coming from Sharp for me, whereas maybe you would have spent $20,000, $30,000 on an operation. I think one bill was like $1.5 million.
Yeah.
It was quite a bit. So spend time, talk to your medical team, see what you can do. Just don't make a hasty decision.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It's tough though, because you were desperate though.
Yeah, desperate
so
time.
I think maybe having that team of people that you can really trust and who have your best interest in mind, and that's going to help you, connect that emotional desperation that you're feeling with the logistical and, objective next steps that make sense for you having the best outcomes, and kind of combining them together with people that you trust who are professionals.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's really difficult to separate the emotional need and kind of the desperation from the right thing to do. But I think your point about the cost of it really speaks to the dangers of a bariatric exclusion, because my guess is that you blew up WJR's insurance spending for the year with that claim, and they probably could have. They probably could have saved a lot of money had they offered bariatric surgery. So I think that's something that, we really need to get out to employers, is that little short-term savings you may get by eliminating or excluding bariatric surgery may end up biting you in the long run and causing this catastrophic claim. Because the insurance for companies is complicated, but catastrophic claims they do pay a portion of it. And it does influence their spending going forward. And so I think, particularly for higher risk patients, if you put exclusion on that policy, that can be quite expensive in the long run.
I agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Armetta. It was so good to catch up with you.
Gosh, what a story. I can understand why she's one of your most memorable patients and has a procedure named after her.
The Armetta procedure. Again, I've done it since, and it worked. It's a good procedure.
That's
and
crazy.
It's actually out there in the literature too. When I did the procedure, it really wasn't in the literature 10 years ago, but there's other people who have kind of talked about this, and it's now the actual technical name in our specialty is a fistula J. Or the J stands for jejunostomy. That means we connect the fistula to a loop of small bowel. 10 years ago, that really wasn't out there because the most common treatment at that time was a total gastrectomy,
right.
Which is it's a rough procedure.
Well, and also, what a much better quality of life you were able to give her by not doing that.
Yeah. Now that we're 10 years out, I think if I asked 10 surgeons what to do now, I think probably at least 9 of them would have agreed with the fistula judge. I think at the time I got probably more people telling me to do a total gastrectomy because that was kind of the standard answer back then. But we learn, and that's why they call it the practice of medicine, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So, Zoe, what do we have for nutrition this week?
Well, I wanted to talk today about sodium. Because I get a lot of questions about replenishing electrolytes, right? Patients asking, should I add electrolytes to my water, the liquid IV, the different things like that. And most of the time, my answer is you don't need it.
Yeah.
Most Americans get far too much sodium. Yeah. And also, unless you're like running a sweaty marathon,
Yeah.
you know, you don't need to be running quite that much. That was an exaggeration, but still, like, unless you're doing an hour of intense, sweaty exercise
Right. In the heat. Right.
regularly, you don't need to replenish those electrolytes. You know, if you're eating a wide variety of whole foods, a lot of foods have natural sodium in there and the other electrolytes, of course, as well. So don't really worry about it, honestly. And so in terms of specifically with sodium, most of the time I do generally recommend to pick low sodium options of things, whether it's canned beans or, you know, whatever sort of option it is to get a lower sodium, because of that statistic of most Americans. I think they get over 4,000 milligrams of sodium every day. The daily recommended dose is 2,300 or about less, depending on your cardiovascular status. You know, if you have hypertension and those different types of things, then we want to have less sodium. But most people could benefit from watching their sodium intake, but you don't need to really worry about it so much unless you've been diagnosed with a cardiovascular condition.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of important points too about sodium. The first is it doesn't contribute to obesity.
Right.
That's the first thing. Like how much sodium or how low of sodium you eat.
But what is related is, where do most people get all that sodium from? Is highly processed foods, which are obesogenic.
Right. Yeah. So the high sodium content is absolutely a marker for processed foods or heavy or fattening foods. A good guideline that you can use to look and determine if a food is high in sodium is the ratio of the number of calories in the food to the milligrams of sodium. And it should be kind of 1-to-1. If you look at 2,300 milligrams as the recommended allowance for sodium, 2,300 calories is probably about the average amount of food that people eat in a day. So that's kind of a good, if it has more sodium than calories, it's probably a little bit more processed. That's not an absolute rule, but that's a general guideline.
I've never heard that.
You've never heard that rule?
I'm so glad you shared that.
Yeah. So I think it just kind of makes sense. It's, if you're going to eat 2,300 milligrams in a day and eat about 2,300 calories, then that'll tell you more.
And just for a little visualization for you guys, 2,300 milligrams of sodium is the equivalent of 1 teaspoon of table salt.
Okay.
So think about a teaspoon of table salt, but that's not only for salting your food. That's all of the sodium in all of the different foods that you're eating throughout the day. And so, you know, people who salt their food heavily, then that gives you like kind of a good gauge. But I personally don't salt my food. I don't really cook with salt. I go for low sodium. I'm very active and I'm fine.
Have you ever been hospitalized for any electrolyte abnormalities? No. And I think that's the really important point, is that if you have ready access to food and water, your body will automatically correct for this. And if your potassium's low, you might look at that banana or that citrus fruit and be like, oh, that looks really refreshing and good.
Exactly.
And so your brain knows. We have this inborn nutritional intelligence that kind of tells us what we should and shouldn't be eating. And just if you rely on that and eat healthy food and have ready access to them, you're not, marooned on a desert island starving to death, then you'll correct your electrolytes pretty straight.
That's going to change my answer. If anybody asks what food do you want with you stuck on a desert island, I'm going to look for electrolyte rich foods.
Totally. Not licorice. Yeah. Well, let's move into our economics of obesity segment. We're going to talk about overseas and really specifically weight loss surgery in Mexico. There's a lot of people who go down to Mexico because the price is significantly less than it is here in the United States. I've seen this many, many times where I've talked to a patient and they've come to see us for some help with whatever happened after their bariatric surgery. And I'm like, well, where'd you have your surgery? They tell me they had it in Mexico. And I look at their insurance, and we check everybody's insurance when they come in for an office visit, and we know who has bariatric surgery coverage and who doesn't. A lot of the times the patients had bariatric surgery coverage. They could have absolutely had it done in the United States, but they assumed that bariatric surgery wasn't covered by insurance. 95% of all insurance policies cover bariatric surgery. And so the only people who should even begin to think about going overseas are people who have a bariatric exclusion, like what Armetta had.
Right.
And so if you have a bariatric exclusion, that's a different story. You're not going to get the bariatric surgery paid for. But there are some patients and there are some centers who do good work down in Mexico. There's absolutely no question. And they actually even publish in our journals. And so I looked through some of the journal articles to see what the centers in Mexico are publishing. The first thing that I will tell you is that their follow-up rate for even a 1-week post-op visit is less than 50%. So one of the key components to bariatric surgery is long-term care. And that's why we've created our support group. And, we track down our patients. And, if you haven't seen us, if you're out there listening to us and you haven't seen us in a year or so, please come in, check in with us, get your labs drawn, make sure you're on track, make sure you maybe haven't started any weight gaining medications. And if you have gained a few pounds, there's a lot of options we have to help you. So postoperative care as part of the surgery is key. And when you have it overseas, in general, you're not going back. Some of the places do offer telemedicine, and I think that's great, but the majority don't. I mean, this is really kind of a cash for surgery transaction. The other thing that I saw is that there is a substantially higher complication rate in the couple of Mexico studies that I saw compared to what our national averages are. So our national averages for a sleeve is about 1%. Serious complication rate, and it's about 2% for gastric bypass. In these studies, they showed a 6.4% rate of serious complications. This was a gastric bypass study. So they had a 6.4% rate of serious complication for gastric bypass, which is it's about three times higher than what we see in the United States. They also had a 3.2% rate of fistula formation. That's what Armetta had, was a fistula, and that's what resulted in what everything she went through. I don't know that I've had 3 fistulas in the last 10 years. And so that rate seems extraordinarily high. And so I think we do have to acknowledge that when we look at overseas surgery, it is not as safe as it is here in the United States. Especially, you go to a center of excellence, you go to someone who is an experienced surgeon who's done thousands of these things, we're seeing complication rates in our practice less than 1%. And that's all surgeries, sleeves, gastric bypasses. I've done 1,500 sleeves. I've never had a leak from a sleeve. And so I think it is possible to do these surgeries almost at that 0% serious complication rate. I don't want to tell you, I don't have a 0% serious complication rate. Nobody does. But I absolutely don't have a 6.4% rate of serious complication. So I think surgery in Mexico is appropriate if you are young and healthy, and it's not a revision surgery. It's a first-time surgery. I think bypasses are a more challenging surgery. I think I would probably stick to sleeves over in Mexico. It's a much easier surgery to do. I think going there, if you're high risk, going there for a revision procedure, you're potentially taking a substantial amount of risk with this.
Well, I mean, if we think about what you were saying earlier about most people have bariatric coverage. 95% of people who are on insurance have bariatric coverage, whether they have an exclusion or they don't have insurance or whatever. So that means we're looking at paying out of pocket.
Right.
So then it's like, okay, maybe look around your area for those self-pay options.
Right.
And it might be more affordable than you think.
Yeah. I mean, I think we talked about this in the past episode. I think actually while you were gone, we talked about this. And bariatric surgery in Mexico is $5,000 to $8,000, somewhere in that range. That's not very much money, truthfully, for a major surgery.
Right. But I mean, also if you compare that to, for example, our self-pay surgery costs, it's not like that significantly different. So I don't know, it almost seems like do your research like we've already talked about, but maybe it's a matter of not just automatically assuming that it's going to be the best, most cheapest option. I just kind of.
I think you start factoring in time off of work, the flight, and all that kind of stuff, and potentially the cost of a complication.
Right. We were talking about with Armetta. You know, her insurance didn't want to cover let's call it $10,000 surgery, and they ended up spending $1.5 million for a 5-month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And from her perspective, honestly, she lost wages for 6 months.
Yeah.
And then, truthfully, for another year after that until she recovered.
Absolutely.
So
talk about economics.
Yeah. So I think it's important to really factor in everything. I think if you are looking at going overseas, be careful. There are good places. Do your homework. Right. There are good places. There are bad places. The complication rate is a little bit higher. And so I would just be careful with that decision.
Do your due diligence.
Do your research. Yeah. All right. Well, we have a special guest today. We have Ashton, and she is going to help us with our questions. So Ashton, what kind of questions do we have out there from social media this week?
So the first question is from Gordon. He sent us an email, and he said, "I am already on a mostly vegan diet with the exception of eggs and fish. I do eat vegan junk food, however. The elimination of things like chips, chocolate, processed soy milk, packaged miso soup, canned bottled chili, olives, etc. from my diet will definitely result in hunger. I also have a tendency to binge at night. Will the MRD plan work for me?"
So MRD being metabolic reset diet, and the answer is absolutely, especially if you're already suffering from hunger by taking away those processed vegan junk foods. Because here's the thing, just because it's a vegan diet does not automatically mean that it's healthier or aligned with losing weight, right? And of course, you know that, and that's why you asked the question. So the metabolic reset diet not only will help you with your hunger and with propelling weight loss if that's what you're wanting, but it's also going to help, in my opinion and in my experience, what I've seen with patients, that binging at night, because if you're eating enough during the day and your body is nourished and you're fueled and you're not feeling hungry, that helps to quiet that food noise, and that helps to decrease that tendency to binge at night. So I would say head on into a metabolic reset diet session with me over at the nutrition program. We also have the free metabolic reset diet download. If you haven't gotten that handout yet, you can get that from our website. So know that there's a lot of resources, and we're here to help. So I would say lean into the metabolic reset diet. We can adapt it to make it fit with your modified vegan diet, and I know that you'll be able to help curb that hunger.
Yeah. I think, the metabolic reset diet in our program is certainly very vegan friendly. It's not a vegan diet, but if you are a vegan, you can still follow it. So veganism is a tough lifestyle. There's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And, where if you kind of eat the wrong way as a omnivore, eating meat and everything else, you tend not to get into any nutritional trouble. But you absolutely can get into nutritional trouble as a vegan if you do it the wrong way. Yeah,
I mean, I feel like, especially in college, I remember a couple different people who were vegetarian or vegan but didn't eat any vegetables. Like they were just eating, cereal, and it's like, or, whatever. Yeah. It's like,
if you're going to be vegan, you got to eat vegetables.
Right.
All right. What's our next question, Ashton?
Okay, this one's from Instagram from Doc2W. What in the mechanics of the sleeve contribute to the GERD that the RNY corrects?
Oh, that's a great question.
That is a great question. So in general, the most common thing, and we do a lot of endoscopy on patients who have acid reflux after a sleeve. So in general, the description I use is called hourglass stenosis. And part of it is because it's actually a great diagnosis for getting surgery approved, but it really does very accurately describe what we see, which is that, if you make the sleeve incorrectly at the very top, if you kind of go out and you get the top of the hourglass, and then you have this kind of narrowing at this area of the stomach called the incisura, which is kind of this angle or bend, and then it kind of splays out. And that's, a sleeve shouldn't be sleeved all the way down to the bottom of the stomach. You do want to leave that part of the stomach called the antrum. You do want to leave a little bit of that part more in its normal state. And so when you get this kind of hourglass formation, the acid that forms in the stomach can just reflux up, and it increases the pressure and it pushes it up. There's a couple of other things too. Hiatal hernias contribute quite a bit to acid reflux after a sleeve. And a hiatal hernia is when the stomach slides up through the hole in the diaphragm. So the diaphragm is this big, thick muscle that separates your abdomen from your chest, and it kind of connects your ribs together, and it flattens out, and that's how we breathe. And there's a little hole in it where your esophagus comes through and then the stomach goes through. And we'll tighten that hole up often when we do sleeve gastrectomies or even gastric bypasses. We'll fix hiatal hernias. The problem is with the sleeve, you have a skinny tube. And you have a hole and a skinny tube, and that skinny tube can slide it back up into that hole. And so we see quite a high recurrence rate of hiatal hernias after sleeve gastrectomy, and then that puts that junction between the esophagus and the stomach up into the chest, and it just doesn't work right there because it's a negative pressure when you breathe in. And so that negative pressure kind of opens up the valve and lets the acid rush in. And so what we do when we convert to a gastric bypass is we separate the bottom part of the stomach, which is where the acid is made, from the top part of the stomach. And so we separate where the acid's made from the esophagus. So that acid is still made, but it can't go back up into that top part of the stomach and cause acid reflux. And so a gastric bypass is incredibly effective. So it works by separating the acid from the esophagus. And secondly, it decreases the pressure because of that hourglass stenosis. The pressure can build up in the stomach, and that high pressure pushes it up, especially with a hiatal hernia. And so when we divide the stomach, we divide it above that stenosis or narrowing, then the pressure in the stomach decreases by a factor of 3-fold. They've measured this, and it's a 3 times decrease in pressure with a gastric bypass compared to a sleeve. So that decreased pressure also helps quite a bit.
Great explanation.
All right. I felt like I needed a drawing to do that.
I think you have a video on that, don't you?
I have a couple videos on that. All right, Ashton, what's our last question for the day?
Okay, our last one is from Christine, also from Instagram. And she said, I had the gastric sleeve done in 2020 and had a great success with it, losing 100 pounds. I started to gain weight, and once I was at a 17-pound regain, I didn't want to spiral out of control. So I took the initiative and started Ozempic in November. I successfully lost the 17-pound regain and an additional 10 pounds on top of that. I started at the 0.5 milligram dose the first month. Then the second month I went to the 0.75 milligram. Then the third month I went to the 1 milligram. Now I am 5'8" and 142 pounds and don't really want to lose any more weight. What is the best strategy to maintain this current weight?
So Zoe, nutritionally, what are you going to recommend for this patient?
Well, I'm going to make sure that she's getting in enough protein, that we're adding in veggies, she's reaching her hydration, and also that, if she's exercising, we want to make sure that she has a good balance of those complex healthy carbohydrates as well to support that energy.
Yeah. I think that the key here is that this is weight regain. And I look at weight regain in this patient a little bit differently than, like, if you take out the sleeve from this patient, then I'm going to give you a totally different answer than I will because this patient's had a sleeve. But she regained 17 pounds. And so typically we look at these medications as a long-term medication. The big question I have, and I still don't know the answer to it, is do we need long-term medications after bariatric surgery for weight regain? And I think we're starting to see a little bit of evidence that maybe we can get away with, if not, completely stopping it, but really spacing out the dosing interval, or even kind of giving patients holidays from the medication. We're seeing this because of the shortages. It's being imposed on us. And I'm seeing a number of bariatric surgery patients who've lost weight on the meds, not necessarily regaining weight the way I would expect and the way we're seeing in our non-bariatric surgery patients. So, this is a lot to
There's
unpack.
a lot of questions.
Yeah. This is certainly, if you're out there, this would be a perfect Pound to Cure Platinum kind of scenario.
For sure.
Where we would help work with you and come up with a strategy for minimizing your use of the medications and
Creative dosing strategy
to minimize cost and
honing
also
in on that nutrition, a lot of unanswered questions, because obviously it's just a DM. So, obviously there's a lot we don't know here.
I would work to minimize the use of medications and really push, over to Zoe to help with the metabolic reset diet and the exercise and all that kind of stuff. And I think if we can put that in place, we can get you to a point, you're talking about 0.5 or 0.75. I would be potentially looking at every other week dosing, a month, every other, even monthly.
Not staying at that one.
Yeah, we had patients doing well with monthly dosing, and it'll vary. And I think that's the important thing too, is that the idea that you're going to be on this med and stay on the same dose, and this is how they did the trials, and it makes sense. And these are what the FDA is recommending, but because of the cost and because of the need to be on these long term, our goal really should be to minimize the use of the meds as much as possible. And there are strategies that will allow us to do that. And I think over time we'll find that these strategies are probably in people's best interest. And it takes away this, like, I'm going to just max myself out on the meds and eat like crap. And because we know that's not going to be a healthy option. And we really want people to push and make the best in nutrition and use the meds as little as possible. I think that's going to be the healthiest, best.
Supplementary.
Yeah, supplementary best strategy. So the best strategy is minimize the use of meds and maximize the use of the metabolic reset diet. And how exactly we do that, that's something you kind of have to figure out
More
over time.
individualized.
Yeah. But interesting question, and certainly something we're seeing a lot in our practice. Yeah. And there's no data on this. This is kind of what we've learned after, putting a lot of people on these meds.
Right.
All right. Another great episode.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
I just love hearing from all of our different patients and the wild stories and just, how much like people's lives can really change,
I know.
It's incredible.
I mean, bariatric surgery is such an awesome field to be in, and weight loss, because you get someone to lose 100 pounds, you have a friend for life. You really do. Mm-hmm. And being able to kind of spend our day, and you spend your day this way, I spend my day this way, kind of being a part of this amazing transformation in people's lives, it's pretty awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, what a great way to spend your day or your life, really. Mm-hmm. So
we're lucky.
We are lucky. Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us today. And of course, we need to thank our guest producer, Ashton and Rhiannon and the editing of the podcast is done with our team over at AutoGrow. And of course, a special thanks to our double black diamond patient guest today, Armetta.
Absolutely. So check us out on social media. Consider joining our online nutrition program or a Pound of Cure Platinum program. And we'll see you next time.